Hey there, and welcome to this episode of the OncoPT podcast. We have a guest who's been on the podcast previously, now back to talk about some really timely updates that are going on right now in the United States regarding DIEP Flap. So without any further ado, Terri Coutee, welcome back to the OncoPT podcast.
Okay, Elise, can I just tell the entire audience of listeners that, thank you, by the way, that you, my dear, are the reason that I am podcasting. that podcast that we did whenever it was during the pandemic, and you said to me,
Yes.
Terri, you should start podcasting. And I'm like, ooh. And then the biggest thing you said to me, I'll help you. Now, okay, how could I resist? So I'm thrilled to be back. I'm thrilled to be back.
I feel like you're giving me a lot of credit here because I think I said, Terri, you should start a podcast. And then we got on like one call and you had half of everything I was going to tell you figured out. And then you just ran with it. So I feel like you're giving me a lot of credit that like you did a ton of it too.
Well, here we are, both podcasting, and I love it that I'm back on your show because it is so valuable. Your information is so valuable, Elise. And can I also say, on my private Facebook page, which now has over 11,000 members, due to the members, I'm giving all the credit to the members. I really appreciate having you on that page as our Journey certified lymphedema therapist. The patients appreciate it. So I'm just going to give you a shout out. All the kudos to Elise today. But I mean them sincerely because, the members of that group really appreciate me being able to reference healthcare professionals for questions I can't answer. So there you go.
Mm-hmm. I'm really, first of all, I'm very privileged to be on that. That's something that I think is really lacking in a lot of spaces. And I actually, it's funny you bring that up, Terri. I have a new patient that I've been working with. And the other day we were talking about just how challenging it is because she's a well-educated individual. But even in the face of her diagnosis and going through all the treatment and now navigating I'm done with active cancer treatment, but now I'm, trying to weigh options for breast reconstruction, etc., how much she's having to now almost like relearn or learn after the fact that she told me. I mean, literally, she's on my table and she's like, I wish I had known all of this a year ago or 6 months ago. And what I love about you and your community, Terri, and your platform is that you're taking so much of that information that I've had patients tell me, because I see most of my patients after they're done with treatment.
Mm-hmm.
You are taking so much of the information that patients are actively searching for and frankly just not finding, even on the big wide web that we have that's so amazing. They're not finding it. And you've created a hub of resources and community for patients to find this information. So for the listener who has not yet encountered you or hasn't listened to our episode from, oh my God, like how many years ago?
Let's not say the date.
What you do.
Yes, I will. Thank you. Yeah. So I, name is Terri Coutee, and I am the founder and director of Deep Sea Foundation. So how that happened, I had a recurrence of breast cancer in 2014. So back up to 2002, I had a left breast breast cancer that I treated at MD Anderson, wonderful center. Protocol at the time was lumpectomy. Didn't get clear margins the first time, so I had the second lumpectomy. Then I had 18 weeks of intensive chemotherapy, fluorouracil, adriamycin, and Cytoxan, sometimes known as the Red Devil. sucked me under big time. I ended up in the hospital. It happens. This is a course of things that you sometimes have to be prepared for, not always. Breast cancer treatment has come so far these days, but in 2002, this was my course of treatment. It was followed by 6 weeks of radiation, 5 years of tamoxifen. I was humming along, getting back to work, doing what I love to do, which is I've always been a lifelong educator, ESL trained educator. Decided to go back and get my master's in teacher leadership. And I just thought I was on top of the world. I was loving being back in school. And then I had a second diagnosis right at the end of my first semester of my master's program. I have to give a big shout out to my professors who really championed me through finals and, getting all the stuff I needed to do to complete that semester while having my double mastectomy, while looking for a surgeon to perform my DIEP Flap surgery. So it was 2014 was a noisy and challenging year for me. And I really believe that that's when my advocacy started. I didn't know that at the time. So May of 2014, I had my double mastectomy. At the time, no one was in my area. So now we're talking about access to care, right? No one was in my area that I felt comfortable having my DIEP Flap reconstruction, which I'll tell you a little bit about in a minute. So I had to start looking around while I was in recovery, going to physical therapy, keeping my chest wall or my skin and tissue away from my chest wall to prepare me for my DIEP Flap, which happened in December of 2014. I switched my Twitter account at the time because I went under the name @6state because I've had teaching certificates in 6 states. So that's how I came up with that name. I didn't want anybody to find out who I was. I just wanted to kind of lurk on Twitter. I never changed that name. And after my DIEP Flap in early December of 2014, I came back, and as I was in recovery, I realized I had to pivot, as people often say, and I found a new life calling. I started writing a blog about my experience called deepseajourney.com, which is all part of my, foundation now. And a year later, the dude calls me. Not the Lebowski dude, but my reconstructive surgeon, Dr. Crisopolo, called me and highly encouraged me to start a nonprofit foundation because he, like you, Elise, he also saw the need for the education. Fast forward to July of 2016. Yes, 2016. I got designation from the IRS as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Yes, we've been going strong since then. And it's so interesting what you said earlier, Elise, about the patients on my Facebook page and what you've learned from them. So in my mind, they have helped me develop my foundation. Because when I first started, I'm like, oh, had breast cancer again? Go get a DIEP Flap. Wow. I know so much more now. There's aesthetic flat closure. There's implant-based reconstruction. There are a number of autologous tissue options that patients can use, and autologous means using your own tissue. So I'm going to focus real quickly on DIEP Flap, which is what I had.
Yeah.
The day I went in and learned I had to have a mastectomy, I had absolutely zero thoughts of having breast reconstruction. I didn't know about it. I didn't know what my options are, but I was extremely fortunate to have a breast surgeon who was very well connected, very much up on all the options for breast reconstruction. And when she told me, she gave me all my options. And this is what all women should be given, all people should be given, because men can have reconstruction too. She told me all my options. And for me, almost from the get-go, I was like, I want to have DIEP Flap. That's it. I want to use my own tissue. I'd had 2 big boys. I had the belly at the time. Not anymore. I've had real estate relocation, but I had the belly, and that's what I call it sometimes. The tummy is now the breast, but that's good because I think I was so fascinated with this surgery because of the advancements in it. There are many people who have wonderful results from implants, and there are women who have had implants for enhancement surgery. All of that's good, but in my mind, and maybe it was my background in education, and knowing how far and how advanced we've become in the world of breast surgery and breast reconstruction, I just glommed onto DIEP Flap. So DIEP stands for deep inferior epigastric perforators. So if you think of deep, meaning deep within your abdominal wall, and it's really not that deep. It's more under the skin and fascia layer. If I'm saying these words correctly, you correct me, please.
Yep.
So it's not that deep, but it's under the skin and the fascia. And so they tease out the perforators, deep inferior, they're inside, epigastric, meaning the abdominal area, perforators, meaning the blood vessels. So the absolute exquisiteness and mastery of this type of surgery, they do not use the tummy muscles. So your rectus abdominis is not compromised like it was they're still doing this procedure, but the original form of this type of autologous reconstruction was called a TRAM flap, but you took the rectus muscle. When you take the rectus muscle, you have a higher risk of a hernia, a bulge, because you lose the muscle that holds all that together. And a lot of times, mesh is used. So for the DIEP Flap, in the hands of a skilled surgeon, mesh does not often have to be used. Sometimes, yes, it does. Try to use absorbable mesh. But oftentimes it doesn't, you don't even need to use mesh. So they take the tissue, the skin, the tissue, the blood vessels, literally disconnect it. And they transfer that up to the breast area where the mastectomy was performed. And you have soft, warm breast because the tummy tissue, it's called the gold standard for a reason, because the tummy tissue most mimics the breast tissue. And so it's transferred up to the breast area. It is a multi-step or multi-surgery process. And generally speaking, women can complete their breast reconstruction if they're choosing to use their own tissue like DIEP Flap in 2 to 3 steps. The first surgery is the major surgery. It takes more time. It takes more recovery, generally speaking around 6 weeks. And over a period, I would say, of about a year, if you have a surgeon who does nerve reconstruction, you will get feeling back over a year. You will gain mobility and gain confidence in your body again to get back to your normal exercise. And that's so important to so many women, because many of us are either mothers, we're ranchers, we're gardeners, we're professionals. We want to get to the point where we can get back to our normal lives. We know after breast cancer, there's always going to be a new normal. But
Right.
this was such life-changing surgery for me, Elise, that is primarily why I opened the foundation. Because like I said, I used to say at the very beginning, whoop, mastectomy, go have DIEP. I don't do that anymore. Someone just asked me this question the other day. I was at a conference, and I said, what I provide is the information from diagnosis to finding a board-certified, skilled plastic surgeon, to preparing for surgery, and in between there, letting them know what all their options are, because it's not always DIEP Flap, letting them know what all their options are, preparing for surgery, wishing people well during their surgery, answering questions and having private conversations with them if I need to, and then watching them during recovery, providing resources like yours that help with recovery, physical therapy, and a number of other resources and services, and then on to survivorship. So my group has taught me to broaden my scope of service. And I can only do this because I have the support of patients, I have the support of surgeons, and I have the support of other healthcare professionals who have provided this 24/7 resource and library that the foundation provides via our podcast, via our YouTube channel. The podcast is deepseajourney.com. The podcast, the podcast is deepseajourney.com. The YouTube channel is under deepseafoundation.org. Instagram, Deep Sea Foundation. I mean, I can give you all these and you can put them in the show notes where people can find us. But that's the 10,000 foot level. And I'm inspired every day by stories from women and men who have been through this. So that's it.
And it's so cool. I was first introduced to DIEP Flap reconstruction. Ooh, I kind of have to think for a hot minute. My godmother was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was a teenager, which that was a hot minute ago. And even then, like there were at the time when she had it done, there were 4 main hubs in the United States that were doing this procedure. And so she went down to New Orleans and had her procedure. And I did not understand it. I was in high school, didn't have medical knowledge. And even then, it wasn't until I started practicing as a physical therapist working with oncology patients that I really sat with her and was like, oh, now I understand what this is. And I was seeing patients because there's a very big, actually a few practices in my area and nearby that are doing DIEP Flap reconstructions. And so I see a good chunk of them in my own practice. I also, I've had a patient from your foundation who was referred to me by your group who had her surgery in a different city come back and do rehab with me. And it's so cool because, again, thinking about when my godmother had all this done, she had 4 options in the United States to have this procedure done. And in the, 15 plus years since she had it done, it has expanded, but there's still a lot of unknowns about it. One of the things that I hear a lot of when I'm talking to people who maybe don't really understand what DIEP Flap is, or they have a very misconstrued version of it, it's a tummy tuck and a boob job, and that's all that they think of it. And in fact, DIEP Flap is so much more than that. And I bring this up because A, it's a big misconception, but B, I think this mentality may in my opinion, also have contributed to some of where we are today, which is also why I brought you on the podcast. To start the conversation, what the heck is going on with DIEP Flap reconstruction and insurance coverage right now in the United States?
Yeah. So it is a multi-layer decisional problem. That's how I'm going to define it as a patient and a patient advocate. The reason I say that,
Okay.
insurance is a very complex system. We all know that. And from the top down, however you want to look at it, or from the bottom up, there are decision makers who make decisions about insurance coverage for anything. Anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that over the last 3 years, our healthcare system is under a great deal of stress. Now, I will tell you that the issues that are happening currently with coverage, insurance coverage for DIEP Flap, happened long before the pandemic. This is how multi-layered it is. This is how many entities were involved in it. And I have to tell you, Elise, I heard about this a year ago. It was just about a year ago that this was first mentioned to me. And when I was told about it, I had a total look of deer in the headlights. And the reason is because what I was told was happening, I couldn't believe it. If something sounds so off to me, it kind of doesn't go in here. That's how I process information.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a year ago for me. And over the past year, I've learned about what procedures, what decision makers went into place to make these changes. We don't need to go into that today because to me it's far too complex. But I sat down one day and I made a personal org chart to understand this. And I put the decision makers from the bottom up and the top down.
Mm-hmm.
What has happened, I think many patients, I don't want to assume anything, but we're talking about in the US. So many patients know that attached to a procedure of any kind, there is a medical code. And those medical codes, the coverage for those can change. That's what happened with DIEP Flap. There's something called an S code that specifically talked about autologous reconstruction. DIEP Flap, I think SGAP was included in that. Either way, it was for autologous reconstruction. And as I said at the beginning of this podcast, the reason I chose it is because I felt so bloody lucky that I was living in a time that I had the option to choose the most advanced form of breast reconstruction, which is using your own tissue that has to be performed by a microsurgeon. So I'm going to weave a few things into this conversation because when they take these S codes away, which are supposed to sunset at the end of December 2024, that ends coverage for DIEP Flap. That's an access issue. Now, when I say end coverage, I don't mean that ends DIEP Flap. Right. Surgeons will continue to perform DIEP Flap, but it will only be available for people who can pay out of pocket $50,000, $60,000. That's a ballpark figure. I don't know what the exact amount is. I had insurance coverage. So the patient is involved, right? I'm giving you the back end story, but I'm going to give you some hope here in a minute. The patient is involved. And I really want to weave into the conversation the surgeon. Elise, you're a businesswoman. You run a business. You have to generate revenue. You have to pay for insurance. You have to pay for training. You have, list goes on. I'm the same way. I'm the same way. I have a nonprofit business. I have expenses. For those surgeons who are in private practice, and these are the ones across the country that have grown since your godmother only had 4 choices. Now, I can tell you, because I'm in collaboration with some of them, they do podcasts and videos for me. They're across the United States. They open private practice. They have a brick and mortar to pay for. They have personal insurance for their staff to pay for. They have staff to pay for. They have hospital fees. I need to just go on with the list. And because insurance is no longer going to cover this, it's also affecting the surgeons. It's not because they want to stuff their pockets with money. Okay, they went to medical school. We all know about payment. I don't even want to put that conversation on the table. What this is about is providing access to care and allowing them as surgeons to continue to do that, and allowing patients who already have insurance, who are working women and men like you and I are, who are paying for insurance, to be able to use it. So now let's go to the hope, because at the end of 2023, just a few months ago, there was, in my personal opinion, there began to be a cacophony of noise about this. And that was okay. But it was very frustrating to me personally, because I'm a very procedural person, and that's just me. And I think that procedure has to be done to make change. I also feel like there has to be collaboration done. And just the feeling I was getting at the end of December, beginning of January, even moving into February, there was factions that were, taking sides. And so it was upsetting to me. And so I just pulled back and laid low and kept learning about this. I joined forces with, some people to learn about it, to educate women about it. But what I continue to do is just educate about DIEP. I thought that's the best thing I can do. So fast forward, that cacophony of noise and those factions, to me, have now funneled into a good purpose. And I see something very hopeful that has happened over the last couple of weeks. So on June, because it doesn't matter who's making the noise about it, we all need to reach the same endpoint. Right. And so what has happened through the efforts of many is that on June 1st of 2023, I might turn my head over this way because I do have a resource up on my computer screen.
Yeah, go ahead.
On June 1st, 2023, There is going to be a public hearing that is taking place, and my org chart that I made, it's coming from the top of the org chart, in my estimation. It's coming from the top decider, which is CMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. They are the top deciders. They said, okay, you guys, we heard your noise. We heard your voices. We're going to have a public hearing now. That's happening on June 1st, 2023. If you're a caregiver, if you're a patient, if you're a friend of someone who has had breast reconstruction, DIEP Flap, and you know how life-changing it was for them, or if you know someone who had DIEP Flap and that was the only breast reconstruction they could have because they had chest wall radiation. There's other reasons. I just wrote a blog about it last week, and I shared some patient stories. Some women, that's the only medical option they have if they want to have reconstructive surgery. So if you know anyone, if you're a patient, caregiver, friend, family member, if you just want to champion this cause, now I'm turning over to my screen. CMS has set up this public hearing, and they're having a Zoom meeting from 9 to 5 Eastern time.
Okay. What
I will say is this. I want people to be aware of this because I've been to FDA hearings virtually before. This is a 3-day, from what I remember, this is a 3-day program. It's not all about DIEP Flap. So you don't know when this agenda item, and it is, I'm going to scroll, excuse me just a minute. It's agenda item 1. Reconsideration. That's a strong and powerful word. Reconsideration of S codes associated with breast reconstruction procedures. And the number is HCP 210813XRPKE. If we can put this information in the show notes for people to sign up for this, we can do so. You can be a 5-minute speaker, or you can be a 15-minute speaker. Does it mean you're going to get on the docket? Maybe not. I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of people signing up for this. I feel very strongly about that, and I encourage listeners to do so. But you need to know when there's hearings like this, you got to kind of be in it for the long term. I am actually watching my grandchildren those days, and so I don't even know if I'm going to be able to participate. So if you can't, here's your alternative. You can email CMS, which is the top guys. You can email CMS and you can share your story there. So if you're not comfortable speaking, whether it's for 5 minutes or 15 minutes, if you can't attend these hearings during those days, my time's a little tenuous, family first, watching those grandbabies. But if I can be there, I will. But I know I can send an email, and I know I can tell my story there. So, yeah, what else? I mean, I view this as hope. Yes, I hear your sigh. I view this as hope. What I don't want this to be, if CMS is listening, I don't want this to be a check mark for you. Since you've given me this platform today, Elise, to talk, I don't want this to be a check mark that you said, well, we listened to him. This is my message to anyone at CMS and any of the insurance companies. I never, ever want you to be sitting in the spot I am right now. I never want you to be affected by breast cancer, to have breast cancer, and I never want you to be without coverage for breast reconstruction should you decide you need it. That's what I want you to think about if you are at CMS or any of the big insurance companies. This is a human story. This is a story of where we've come from years ago when we had no options for reconstruction. And then we moved to implants, and then we moved to TRAM flaps. And now we have the highest level of reconstruction that women can have, women and men. Don't count us short. Listen to our stories, and please, please put yourself in my seat right now, if you're listening to this, and say to yourself, what would I want for my wife, my son, my mother, my best friend, my partner, if they lost their breast? What is it I would want for them? I would want them to have a choice of what breast surgery they would like to have. But I also 100% want them to have coverage for this. Because if you're at CMS, you probably have really good insurance. Yeah. There's a lot of people that have really good insurance. Let's put it to work, you guys.
Again, coming back to something that you and I have discussed multiple times already on this podcast is 15 years ago, give or take, there were 4 options for patients. And I'm trying to remember if I can, if hers was covered at the time by insurance or if my godmother's wasn't. I don't remember off the top of my head. But access to care is so critical, especially in the United States. We know that we have notorious issues with healthcare access, period, but especially when it comes to cancer care and breast reconstruction and options for patients. We have such a problem already, and this would compound an already humongous issue that we have. And, again, Terri, because you and I are familiar with this, we know not just the physical aesthetic aftermath of having a DIEP flap. It's not just that a person is like, oh, yep, they're back to normal. They look like they did, before all of this. The psychological benefits of having the choice, having the access, and then being able to undergo this procedure is something that is so important and cannot be ignored, should not be ignored for patients, especially dealing with breast cancer and, maybe other conditions that would necessitate DIEP flap. Obviously, it's most closely associated with the aftermath of breast cancer and breast cancer treatment. But it's not just, and again, I'm going to bring it back up, it is not just a tummy tuck and a boob job. This is sometimes life or death for our patients in having the choice and having the access to this. And it would be such a detriment on so many levels if this ends up going the way that it could. Now, again, I'm hopeful like you, Terri. I think that there's a lot of interest and passion about this in both the healthcare community, but particularly from the patients and the caregivers of patients who have undergone or who want to undergo DIEP flap. But we should not just pass it off to them and say, especially as a rehab professional, I shouldn't just be like, well, that's not really my fight. So my question is now, what can we as rehab professionals do to help with this issue, with this cause?
Every time you run into somebody, whether it's a patient on your table, whether I don't care who it is, any time you run into anybody that you think would have any interest in emailing CMS or in speaking up at this public hearing, give him the information that I just gave you. Ask him to get on board. If they need more information about DIEP Flap, my goodness, there's a ton of information online. If they don't really understand what DIEP Flap is, there are so many good resources out there that explain it. But I think survivorship has become such a key word over the past, 18 months to 2 years. I hear it so often, and there's a reason for that, Elise. It's because we've made advancements in treatment and we've made advancements in surgery. Why would we take the ability to optimize a person's survivorship who can get back into the workforce to provide revenue for all of us here in the United States, no matter what form it is, and to be functioning survivors of breast cancer and to get back to society? Why wouldn't we provide the coverage for them to be allowed to have this surgery to make that happen?
Absolutely.
I
Oh my God.
that's what I have for you. That's just there's a hearing now. All we can do is sign up for it, write CMS, and don't quit talking about it. It's so funny when I look. I mean, we're recording this in May. I learned about this a year ago. When I fast forward to December of 2024, I have a visceral feeling in terms of time and the way time goes by so quickly and how much urgency there is to this message. So don't quit talking about it. Don't quit educating about it, and share this information now. It's what we have right now. There might be another next step, but right now we've got the public hearing. Right now we've got the email that we can send. Top of the org chart is what I call it. CMS. Top of the org chart.
And again, we previously had a conversation off air kind of about here's what's happening now, because you even told me, because I reached out back in like March or something. I was like, hey, I want to get you back on the podcast, whatever. And you were like, we need to put it off by a month so that I can do more research and become as much aware of everything that's going on so we can have the most beneficial, powerful conversation. And first of all, Terri, thank you for doing that, because I know you've been keeping on top of a lot of this. But that was one thing that you shared with me is this is likely, because I don't think the hearing had been announced at that time. It was likely that that was the next step. And you told me, you said, this is probably the order in which things are going to happen. We're going to have this hearing. And then, if, XYZ happens, then this is what happens. So if you're listening to this podcast interview right now, right when this episode drops or in the days afterwards, there is absolutely something for you to do. Again, Terri already mentioned emailing CMS with maybe your experience, but also the experience of those that you love, maybe even talking about your patients and your experience as the healthcare professional, and then showing up for that hearing. I think there's something to be said for showing up in numbers and showing support. And, even though it's going to be Zoom, I think that's almost a better thing, because I think that allows a much greater opportunity for people to be seen, faces to be seen of those who are actually being impacted by this. And it's really important for us to show up and amplify those voices so that patients can continue to have access to this. So again, If you're listening to this right when the episode drops or in the few days afterwards, great, you have your marching orders. If not, I will continue to update this blog, the show notes page associated with this episode, so you have an idea of, okay, what now? What now? Because this is not something that is like a, oh, once June 1st happens, everything's going to be decided. This is a multi-step, multi-layer issue that is happening, and we're going to have to stay on it.
Yes.
We cannot get fatigue over this. We have to stay diligent. I think one of the things that the therapy community has seen most recently is related to the Lymphedema Treatment Act. And we know how long of a process that has been. But guess what? It finally is here. We have to show up with that same level of vigor and excitement and passion and determination for this cause, because that's what our patients deserve and that's what our communities deserve. So again, Terri, all this to say, I will link all of the information that you talked about today in the show notes. Again, as we get updates, I will also update this show notes page so that people can find that if they're listening to this after that June 1st hearing and whenever we find out what those next steps are.
Yes, and to your point, Elise, I encourage everyone. It's like a roller coaster. I feel like I've been on a roller coaster this year. Hang on tight, because you're going to get these peaks and valleys in what's going on. My initial ride on the roller coaster started a year ago, and I was like going up the hill. It peaked in December.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's like it went down, the cacophony of noise, who's on whose side. Then we started going up the hill again. I feel like we're reaching a good peak with this hearing. You know, we may have a few bumps along the way, but just hang on and stay on the ride,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the only way we're going to get stuff done. I just talked to a woman. I was at a conference at Fred Hutch in our great city of Seattle last week. She's in a different cancer space in colon cancer, but I'm using this as an example. She got up and gave a talk and said, CMS, are you listening? It's me again, Terri. She said, I went, I don't know, legislation, Congress, whatever, and told her story, and they made policy changes. Come on, you guys, it's possible.
Oh my God.
And I went up to her afterwards and I said, how did you make that happen? Well, guess what? Since Monday, a week ago, the hearing happened. So here we are. We have the ability to make a policy change. We are sitting at the table. One of the things they said at that conference I went to, sit at the table, otherwise you're going to be on the menu. We don't want to be on the menu. We want to sit at the table, we want to be heard, and we want changes to be made. That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my God.
For talking about this, because you know I wasn't ready a month ago. I appreciate this forum to be able to share this, and let's blast it out when it gets published. That's just more.
Let's do it.
More information.
Yeah. No, and this is, you know, I think sometimes it's especially disheartening to think that I'm just one therapist. I'm just one voice in the cacophony that can sometimes get lost. But it is a one person showing up and speaking up multiple times, and another person showing up and speaking multiple times, that we are then able to amass a truly powerful collection of voices to make this change happen. And that's what we have to do. You know, we have to show up. Like, I know to the physical therapist, listening to this right now, I know that you show up for your patients and you do an amazing job, but I'm asking you to show up just a little bit more because it's what's best for them. And I know that you want what's best for them. So you can do this. I am right along here with you. I am emailing. I will be checking my calendar to make sure that I can attend that hearing because so important. Last question that I'll ask you today, Terri, is where can my listeners find more information about Deep Sea Foundation?
deepseafoundation.org. On my website, there is a link to the blog. You can go to Instagram, look under Deep Sea Foundation. LinkedIn, it's under my name, Terri Coutee. I provide a lot of information there. Our YouTube channel is under Deep Sea Foundation. If you go to YouTube and type in Deep Sea Foundation, DIEP, the letter C, that's the first initial of my last name, Deep Sea Foundation. Thank you. Blog. I highly encourage you to look at the blog because this past week, my blog has all this information that we just talked about, and it's deepseajourney.com. So since I'm a nonprofit, it's deepseafoundation.org. The blog is deepseajourney.com, but there's a link to that on my foundation page. Reach out to me if you have any questions. You can private message me on Twitter at SixDate, Instagram, Pinterest. I have appreciated being able to use the power of social media in a positive way to reach out to patients and connect with healthcare professionals like yourself to be able to educate patients. So throw it out there, and if you have a question, private message me or whatever, and I'll see if I can get back to you.
Perfect.
We want all voices, and I thank you for all the voices.
Terri, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. It's been a privilege to kind of be on the journey, like not the journey, but like see you on your journey, especially as you've grown from, podcast and YouTube and all these other ways that you're really out there and you're reaching my patients. And that's one of, I think, the coolest things is like my patients already have an understanding of information, and that helps us both get to common ground faster, but to make sure that we're addressing what they have questions about and what they're having problems with, because they're already doing so much learning and exposure through your community. And I'm so grateful for that. Like I said, I've seen patients after working with Deep Sea Foundation, and it's making all the difference. And I really, really appreciate the work that you're doing. Listener, as I mentioned, I will link to all of the resources that Terri mentioned on today's interview, as well as I will update this podcast episode show notes with updates as they come, and then what we need to be doing, because again, this is a long haul thing, but again, stick with us on the roller coaster, it's totally worth it. So thank you so much, Terri. I really, really appreciate you.
My absolute pleasure, Elise. Thanks for having me on.